to stay at home. They weren't encouraged to stay at home and play the part of the caregivers in our culture. They would be more willing to work other jobs like on oil rigs. Well, to that one, we could actually look back in history. So yes, for example, for a long time in human history, women and men, but we're talking about women here specifically. Women have been encouraged to do a certain thing. Men as well. We're out. We're either hunting, we're either fighting the wars back in the day when women weren't really part of a major military conflicts. But then we go back to the 50s. Women are still in the kitchen, for lack of a better term. But nowadays, even into the 70s, 80s, there's more of a revival, more of an openness into women like trying shit that they want to do. It's like, no, I'm not gonna I don't want to have a kid at fucking 22. Like I want to go do this. I want to join the military. Now we've got women. So I think right now we're in an age. I mean, it started way before now, before we were born, but we're in an age where we are seeing women on oil rigs already. So I think that in itself kind of answers that question. Yes, if women weren't pushed in a certain direction, they would go their own directions, just as we see them today.
That's an interesting point. I want to push back a little bit, bro. And the reason why I want to push back is because Leroy made a very good point. I forgot which country he mentioned, but Scandinavian countries actually implemented that, and they gravitated more towards those caretaker, those social worker type jobs. And I haven't done the research myself to back that claim up, but if it's true, then that might well be the case, where like even if they have the opportunity, even if they're pushed towards something, like I said, I think there's generalities between men and women. I think men, for example, are like a lot more competitive on average. Like more men like sports on average than women. More like guys, dude, just think of like kids, right? Because I don't like to get in the weeds about adults and their mannerisms. I think the best way to study like gender dynamics is through childhood, because they're not preemptively thinking. They have no like cognitive bias when it comes to a certain like point of view. It's just who they are, right?
Well, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was just saying they may have the biases of what the parents brought onto the kids. Because if you meet a kid, they're like exact copies of their parents, like especially if they're young.
Sure, yeah, and that also goes for religion and policy. But there's kids who don't even have parents, and there's kids who are born in foster care, and you'll still see a lot of the same tendencies, right? You could argue that like if we didn't have our social media presence that pushes these type of things, that would be another topic like or situation where we could tackle. But generally, boys on average like to fight. You don't really see many girls play fighting with each other. That to me is a competitive nature, and we're more physical as men versus women, right? I do think that if it was more mainstream, right? Because it's only recently, like you said, the 80s, 90s, I would say even later than that, it's really become more mainstream where we do see women in different positions than normal. But I don't think it would go to 50-50. I don't think it'll get to the point where like 50% of women are CEOs and 50% of men are CEOs. Just because I think Leroy holds some truth here with the whole like women aren't pushing for these 80 to 100-hour weeks on average. Obviously, there's exceptions to the rule. I don't want to make generalizations.
There definitely are. I know personally a female CEO. Like back when I used to work at a different hospital, the CEO was a woman, and she was the leader of the entire organization, right? So there are people that do these jobs.
In my previous job at Sunrun, there was a female CEO. So obviously there's women holding these positions, right? But I don't think it's going to skew back to 50-50. I think there's always going to be a preference because genetically and like biologically over generations of generations, we have created these tendencies and we've developed into these types of people. And I think, for example, most men, if we took a population of like 1 million women versus 1 million men, I think on average, more men will be interested in sports and competing on a like high level than women would. And I think that sort of answers the question. What's your opinion on it, Leroy?
Well, NL, to answer your question, I think that first off, I think it's already been tried. What you're saying, what you're suggesting, I think that like with the example of the Scandinavian countries, they weren't encouraged, and yet on a level of not being encouraged, they still went back to those sort of positions, right? They still chose to do the jobs that were traditionally less paying jobs, right? They skewed towards the less dangerous jobs. Now, but just to dive a little bit deeper into that, if we just talk about, civilization and human history and just how people are in general, men have a whole lot of testosterone, which is a huge driver into these things that we're talking about, agreeableness and being willing to do these dangerous jobs. In throughout human history, and Jonah touched on this briefly, where men would go out and they would fight the wars, hunt the fucking boars, track down the mammoths, bring the food back, right? And men and the women would be at home back in the camps taking care of the children, right? And I think that just makes sense. And the reason why it has worked for thousands of years on an evolutionary level, because if this was not an advantageous way of organizing ourselves, we would have fucking died off many years ago, right? So the reason that we have survived to today, this is part of the factor, right? Because if you run the experiment over thousands and thousands of years, it's not a fluke at that point, where we are simply biologically stronger and more built for those sorts of things that you're talking about. We're willing to take those risks because we understand that these are more dangerous jobs, and traditionally men are seen as more of the expendable commodities, and when it comes to wars and stuff like that, we're the ones who are always out there fucking dying in the front lines. Part of that has to do with biology, like when it comes to propagating the species, women only have a certain amount of eggs, and at a certain point they run out and there's no more, right? So their value when it comes to reproducing is much higher than ours, because we produce sperm throughout our entire lifetime, right? From of course not when you're a kid, but once you hit puberty and you start producing, you're gonna produce until the day you die, right? So eggs, ovums, are much more expensive, we can say, than sperm are, for example. And so women have always been much more protected when it comes to that. They're also physically weaker. They, on a balanced probability, they're gonna be physically weaker than men. That is, that's like not even debatable. We can see it in the transgender athlete stuff. So I hope that kind of answers your question, my friend. I don't think that I don't think it's a matter of encouragement. I think this is just how things have played out because of the strengths and weaknesses that we, as a society, as humans, as our species, have between each other, right? So I think that the idea that it's encouragement is sort of like new gender theory stuff that I don't agree with at all.
I think just to wrap it up, we actually have another comment that we have to go through after this. But just to wrap it up, I think time will tell as well, because we have seen a difference between what was happening in the 50s compared to what was happening in the 80s that Jonah referenced, to even now where women are getting more promoted to take these different jobs. And so I think over a longer period of time, we'll get a better understanding of how much of this is fake news and real news, right? Like what percentage of it is because women didn't have the opportunities versus they don't want to take the opportunity. And I think over time, we'll figure that out.
Once again, and I'll thank you for your comment, brother. Appreciate
it, man.